Thank you very much, Dr. Posen. Very insightful and very interesting presentation of highlighting the prospects of the Biden administration's international economic policy. I take your key message is the new administration is, of course, have to focus on the domestic matters first, but there are still some room for international cooperation depending on the area, like China and climate change and others. And we are having questions from the audience, but maybe if I may start from myself, I think the presence of the US in the Asia-Pacific region has been quite critical, both strategically and economically. And you mentioned, you sent us a very clear message that the new administration will be extremely difficult to come back to the CPTPP. And that was very clear message. But I think countries like Southeast Asia are very carefully looking at if US is coming back to the region economically or trade policy area. So do you have any views on that, and to reassure countries in the region, in the Asia Pacific?
I wish I had more to offer than I do. So I do think, to put the positive, legitimately positive approach on it, I think the reassurance of allies in Southeast Asia as well as Japan will ultimately play a big role in the Biden administration's thinking, and will ultimately be the argument that brings them back to CPTPP or other measures. Even though it should be done on a purely economic basis alone, that set of arguments will be important. But it is just not a set of arguments that is going to win over these other priorities and concerns in the next couple of years. So I think that the answer is that you will get probably quiet assurances from the people sent by the Biden administration that they are here with you, that they want to be back, they will be back. They will have to be very careful about not doing it publicly, because the left wing of the Democratic Party and others will attack them if they say it too soon. I also think, although this is not my expertise, I do expect them to be pleasantly surprising to some of the right wing in Japan, who always assume that Republicans are much better for defense cooperation with Japan, that actually the Biden administration will probably continue the extensive defense cooperation. And if anything, they may become more explicit in their guarantees for Taiwan and some other neighbors and allies of Japan and the US. So I think it's important that Japanese voices continue and other Southeast Asian voices continue to make the case for wanting the US back in, but I don't think a sort of formal trade agreement or initiative with CPTPP is likely in the next couple of years.
Thank you very much for your comment. I got a question from the audience. Question number one is, there are reports that the GDP of the United States and China will reverse in 2028. What kind of discussions are in the United States about the US-China reversal in the economic term?
I think there are a few foreign policy pundits, if that word translates, people who are very opinionated in the public sphere, who are going to make a big deal about this. Most Americans, including most American officials, couldn't care less. And frankly, I think they're right not to care less. The per capita GDP gap remains enormous. The demographics in China are converting to something much more unfavorable more quickly than the US, even with the changes in immigration. The extent of significant underdevelopment in parts of China is real. So this kind of comparison of GDP is just something some people writing for newspapers and magazines will talk about, but it's not really important. What there is going to be a lot of attention paid to, and this is much more something Rieti I know thinks about, is specific technological areas. Is China a leader in artificial intelligence? Is China developing its own semiconductor capacity? Is China a leader in autonomous cars? Is China doing something new on green energy? That is where the comparisons are going to be both more relevant and also more attention grabbing in the US than the GDP comparisons.
Thank you very much. It's a very sensible perspective, and depending on the area and the high-tech area like AI and semiconductor make very good sense. Thank you very much. And I have another question, and I just read the question. Eurasia Group says that a top risk in 2021 is President Biden. The new occupant of the Oval Office will be seen as illegitimate by roughly half the country. What is your comment?
I don't read stuff by the Eurasia Group, but no. I mean, it's fine. Somebody quotes them. I know they're a big company, but anyway, I wouldn't take that very seriously. We have a system in the U.S. There is a very serious problem. We are a divided society, and the divisions are very much along a clear line. It's not what we would call cross-cutting, that some people agree on some things and not on other things. The people who are pro-Trump and anti-Biden or pro-Republican and anti-Democrat tend to all be from largely one community. They are white, they live outside the cities, they are Christian and religious about it, and they tend to be moderate or low education. And that group disproportionately votes Republican. But the issue is how much of that turns into violent dissent, and that's what's so scary about the last week. I, along with a lot of other people, had frankly expected that kind of violence around the election, and we were very happy not to see it happen during the election. And there are threats of new violence coming now. There are people who suggest that in a sense the violence is almost good because two things will happen. The federal police and military will actually put some of these people in jail, and that will have a deterrent effect on the others. And also, as we saw in today's vote and recent discussions about impeachment, some Republicans are deciding that there is a line they will draw. They will not go past that line. So I think getting into these broad generalizations about the Biden is seen as illegitimate and half the country is not useful. I think what we have to focus on is what happens in Congress, what happens in the 2022 election, how much violence there is, how much the police respond to it. And again, I'm not saying these are unimportant issues. They're very important, but they're much more specific and limited. And there are things you should be watching for, not just sort of general talk about illegitimacy, because that doesn't matter. If you have 50+1 in the Senate and you have a majority in the House, just as happened with Trump, you can do a lot. So that's not really the question.
Thank you very much. The last question from the audience is, can you expect macroeconomic coordination, policy coordination among the advanced economies can happen under the Biden administration?
I think the kind of soft coordination we've had for the last couple of years, which is agreement that everybody should be keeping interest rates low, agreement that nobody should be manipulating the currency, agreement that none of us are going to encourage the others to engage in fiscal austerity. So a lot of things that we didn't do in 2010 that we are doing now, that will continue. I think that the chances of a Biden administration, particularly led and represented by Treasury Secretary Yellen, to do some agreement on things like at the IMF and the World Bank on vaccines, on debt forgiveness, I think that is real, very likely. More aggressive macroeconomic policy coordination, however, I don't think anybody has a concrete proposal. There's not, it's not like we would, I mean, I honestly just don't know quite what the agenda would be. I think the agenda is going to be much more about these agreements on the macroeconomic picture and then potentially agreements on digital taxation, multilateral taxation, international taxation.
Thank you very much. So scheduled time is already passed, but if you may, the really last question from the audience is how does the US work with the EU on border climate adjustment measures or taxonomy of decarbonization? That is a real question.
No, that's a great question, actually. Thank you for allowing us to go over so we can talk about that briefly. That is, I think, one of the central questions for international cooperation and where Japan has a role, but it does start with US-EU. The EU is going to move ahead, is moving faster than any of the other rich countries in terms of raising the carbon price and doing more restrictions. The US is behind. It will now do some things thanks to Biden, but it will not do as much as the EU is doing. And so there is going to be this gap between the pace of decarbonization and the price of carbon in EU versus the US. And so I had a discussion the other day, I can't quote who, but someone who was very, very senior in climate policy for Obama and who is close to President-elect Biden. And I raised exactly this issue with him, you know, that Biden already made a statement criticizing Brazil for the rainforest, lack of protection, and I'm glad he did that. But if he's going to be, US is going to be criticizing Brazil, what happens when the EU criticizes the US? What happens when the US is in the middle rather than at the front? And the advisor, the former very senior official, said a number of things, but specifically on border adjustment, what he said, and I think this does represent the Biden position, is in principle, we agree with border adjustment taxes. We think that we're going to want to use them. There is a technical difference that the Europeans run it basically through carbon price. The US under Biden is likely to do a lot of industry specific subsidies and targeted incentives. And so there will have to be some kind of technical discussion between the US and the EU about how you match those different approaches up. Now, again, this is not someone who's yet been confirmed in the Biden administration, but I, with a very high level of confidence, believe this represents the Biden view on this. That said, I think it's important to recognize that this is also in part just a defensive measure by the Biden people, that they're saying essentially, okay, yeah, if we look at carbon prices, US is behind, but maybe we can have this sort of technical fuzzing it up to try to hide how far behind the US is and make it so that the EU doesn't completely slam us with tariffs. I spoke with another Biden advisor who was basically saying, well, we're going to appeal to them to give us time through the 2022 congressional elections, because if they start hitting us with border adjustment taxes before then, we may lose the states, certain states that are energy producing. So I think it's an incredibly important question. I am directing my team at Peterson Institute to spend a lot of it. One of our priorities for 2021 is trying to address this issue of what's a better way forward. So just to say, I think this merits your attention. I think it's quite uncertain what's going to happen, because there will be these diplomatic initiatives from the Biden administration to try to say we're making progress. It's not the same as Europe, but give us time, don't put on the taxes. There's going to be very strong political pressure within Europe to put on the border adjustment taxes. And so I think this is a very live issue, and it's both political and economic, and it's critically important. I also think that the Biden administration will try to change the discussion to being about putting border adjustment on developing countries, Brazil, India, and the like, rather than between the rich countries. I think that act of hypocrisy is not going to go down well internationally, but that would be consistent with some of the things that the Democratic Party and the previous Obama administration did. I hope that's responsive to your participants' question, because I think it's a great topic.
Thank you very much. Very insightful observation on the very important topics many people in the Japanese policy circle are interested in. Thank you very much for your great presentation and great perspective. And I appreciate your sharing time at very late in the evening in DC time. Thank you very much again. And
thank you for having me, Vice President Watanabe. Thanks to my colleagues at RIETI and everyone who joined. And again, congratulations to RIETI on its 20th anniversary. I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you to say so. And we very much look forward to working with you and your institute. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us. And we'll close the session. Thank you.